So I'm John Borstel, not Liz Lerman, as it may say on your screen. So here's my name in case you need to see it written out. I'm John Borstel. I work closely with Liz. This is the second of our online webinars addressing aspects of critical response process as it is adaptable to online interactions, which is a issue of breaking interest as we negotiate this era of lockdown and quarantine and educational alternatives being mediated by platforms like this Zoom webinar. In our first webinar about a month ago, we explored some general questions around critical response as adapted to an online environment. We were inspired by a couple of aspects of that webinar to bring you a more focused one this time around. We heard some questions about disciplinary application. Liz is a choreographer, and I like to say that in designing critical response process, as she did about 30 years ago, she was in partly choreographing a conversation. Critical response is, despite those roots that can be associated with dance, a method that can be used in all kinds of art forms and other disciplines. So we'll be presenting an example to you that is spoken word based today. And we also got a request in that earlier webinar to demonstrate something. So in this case, we brought in Phil Weaver-Stoesz and CJay as members of this panel to help demonstrate the variation we'll be looking at today, which is we call mutual coaching strategy. There's a bigger question around variations for critical response as well. You know, people will occasionally contact us and say, well, I do it with this twist, or I've got a professor who likes CRP, except they want to do something a little different, and I'm not sure about that. So while we, on the one hand, encourage variations and encourage people to try things out, sometimes the question comes out is, what is still critical response? Do you at any point sort of betray the spirit of critical response by moving too far from its principles? And that is kind of an open question, but we might spend a little time in this webinar exploring that as well. I'm going to introduce you to Liz Lerman, who many of you may be familiar with already. Liz is, among other things, the originator of the critical response process. So I just wanted to throw it to you, Liz, for a minute to see if there's anything you'd like to say about variations, or to lead us in with a little background on mutual coaching strategy, which we'll be demonstrating in a few minutes.
Thanks, John, and thanks, panelists. And it's really fun to see who's here. I wish we could see all of you. In fact, some people have just come on who were around in the early period when we were making critical response. So there may be some other stories to tell today. And also from all of us to all of you, I hope you stay safe and well, and that the people you love are safe too. And we can all send a word out to all our peoples everywhere who are trying to keep themselves safe during this time. What I'd like to say first is that critical response, like most things, was not born instantaneously. It came through a long series of things that were going on for me and in the world in which I was living. But I would say one of the sustaining questions was whether I was in a meeting with the Dance Exchange or in a technique class, which, believe it or not, I taught a lot of in those days, or in rehearsals or in gatherings, was how do you have the knowledge of the group be present? And how do you have the knowledge of everybody who's sitting in the circle, or who's taking the class, who's in the meeting? Well, like you guys now, there, where you are, how does this knowledge get used in a room? Because it struck me that an awful lot of our structures and processes were still single-based, one person leading in the case of technique classes, and then everybody who's there following. So this was on my mind as was a whole series of other things about the giving and receiving of feedback. And I suppose one other piece from that early period was that I had stumbled into something called reevaluation counseling, which is a peer counseling process. You learn the principles and you do it with another person, and you don't really need anything more than that. And I was struck both by some of the things that happened when you had this, but also what was the impact of this dual system, partnering with somebody. So this was all on my mind. I think birth of the, well, let me just say one other thing about a theme and variations, which John already mentioned, is I think I was always nervous about codifying anything for a fear that having grown up in a Reformed Jewish household, aware of what orthodoxy can do, and having been a ballet dancer first before I became other kinds of dancer that I became, realizing what orthodoxy does. And although there are times when we need orthodoxy, where we need, maybe we feel safer in the context of rules, I was kind of a person that was sort of usually pushing at them. And thus the evolution of critical response, although it has an orthodoxy about it, and the orthodoxy is good, I think, there's always been a part of me that's like, yeah, but what else is possible? What else is possible? And I think particularly each of the situations I've named, things happen in front of you, or you're in the midst of some urgent thing that goes on, and you realize the thing that you know has to change a little bit. Or you find out that because of the situation you are in, you are using the thing you know in a different way. And that is the spirit of these variations that we're going to bring today. We're going to bring one of my favorite variations today, but there are many, many practices that people are using with critical response. And I think what John said earlier is the critical piece. We don't want to betray the values of critical response while we do the variations, but the rules themselves or the actual steps may indeed shift a little bit. So just in preparation for the one we're doing today, neutral coaching, it did grow out of my teaching technique classes. And then for those of you familiar with a certain kind of dance technique, I think it's all changing right now, but you know, the teacher stands in front and then everybody else is in lines, or they're, you know, usually in lines facing the teacher, and you do stuff and they do stuff. And I just was frustrated by that. And I spent a fair amount of time experimenting with these structures that each of the students in the class would pair with somebody else, and they would be given a set of steps to do, and things would unfold. And it's in that spirit that we're going to enter mutual coaching. And the reason I'm interested in doing it right now is given the number of online technique classes and understanding that teachers cannot, and they're looking at everybody in these little tiny boxes, the possibility that with some of these tools in your hands, you might be able to pair students up with students in those little breakout rooms, and maybe more things could happen. So I'll send that back to you now, John and Phil and CJ.
Thanks, Liz. So we're going to be demonstrating this variation called mutual coaching strategy. As Liz has suggested, it actually predates critical response process, but it holds some of the same values. And it's a great way for two people to interact as peers in sharing work in progress. And it's particularly adaptable to situations that involve the use of technique or interpretation. And it's in that spirit that we're going to be using it today as our artists share spoken word performances. I'm going to introduce our panelists. They're both people we've worked with in our critical response process certification program, our pilot team. And I'd like to just introduce you each and maybe give you each a chance to say 2 sentences about who you are. So CJ Phillip is joining us from Baltimore. CJ.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Baltimore. The work that I do is with my company, Dance and Be More, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist, background in dance, singing, songwriting, poetry, theater, musical theater. And so, yeah, I love using critical response with my company because we have singers, we have dancers, we have musicians, and we also have a wide range. Our youngest company member is 17. Our oldest company member is 167. And so with that range, there's a lot of knowledge in the room. I love that idea of harnessing the knowledge in the room. And so it sort of evens the playing field of everybody being able to share and contribute to ideas and innovation, no matter what their age range is. And the piece that I'm working on today is a piece that we've done live. And we actually want to do it in this forum and online as a Zoom piece. And so I would be the poet. There's also a singer and a dancer. And so we're going to try this out today to see how to get the most out of the spoken word piece that we'll utilize in the future.
Great, CJay. And Phil, Phil Weaver-Stoesz from now in Phoenix.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me all right? Yes? Great. So I'm Phil Weaver-Stoesz. I live in Phoenix right now, and I spend a lot of time working with a company called Catalyst Creative, which I was one of the co-founders of, and we're doing a project right now on coming-of-age stories. So we're doing a lot of one-on-one interviews with community centers and old folks' homes, especially right now in the pandemic, asking people about moments when they felt like they grew up or moments when they felt like they came of age. I'm also a theater performer and a burgeoning visual artist, thanks actually to John very much. And the piece I'm bringing in today is an audition monologue that I have used for several years, and I'm constantly changing, adjusting it. And back when I was much more of a performer, this is a monologue that I'd be using that I love to keep working on.
Great, thanks, Phil. Phil and CJay have both alluded to pieces that they will be sharing. This is mutual coaching, which means that each party plays both roles in succession. And I think we often talk in reference to critical response about reciprocity. That's part of how it works and why it works is that everybody's equally invested in each other's success. And I think you'll see that demonstrated. A mutual coaching, as we call it, is a three-step. It has 3 rounds in it. I'll be facilitating the first round, the first session of it, as CJay goes first presenting work, and then I'll put up a slide that sort of shows you the steps written out in text. As we go through this, it's very interesting whenever somebody shares work. Because immediately our own minds click into a kind of creative mode, a kind of assessing mode, a critical mode. And I would invite folks to acknowledge that that's happening for them, even as they watch someone else give the coaching. But I'm going to ask you to refrain for now from putting any responses to what you're seeing into the chat. So I'd say hold off on the chat, just immerse yourself in watching the demonstration. And then when the demonstration is over, we'll leave a couple of minutes for you to put in questions or reflections about what you've seen in the chat. Parenthetically, the chat adds this whole different dimension to what happens with critical response and its variations online. And we're still observing and figuring out what that means. But for now, we're asking you to kind of hold off on the text chat as you watch the demonstration. So mutual coaching, as I mentioned, has 3 rounds. And in the first round, so in any round, there are 2 roles. These roles go by various names. I'm going to use the terms artist and coach as we do it today. So one person takes the role of coach. In our first round, that's going to be Phil. One person takes the role of artist. In our first round, that's going to be CJay. And to start, the artist presents their work, which in this case is a performance of a poem. And when that's done, the coach will respond in a way that will be familiar to those of you who know critical response. The coach will respond by saying what's exciting, meaningful, memorable, interesting, what was effective, what they thought really worked in the artist's presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand it to you, CJay, to get us started.
Okay. Present Tense by Jason Lerman. It was spring, but it was summer I wanted. the warm days and great outdoors. It was summer, but it was fall I wanted. The colorful leaves and the cool, dry air. It was fall, but it was winter I wanted. The beautiful snow and the joy of the holiday season. It was winter, but it was spring I wanted, the warmth and the blossoming of nature. I was a child, but it was adulthood I wanted, the freedom and respect. I was 20, but it was 30 I wanted, to be mature and sophisticated. I was middle-aged, but it was 20 I wanted, the youth and the free spirit. I was retired, but it was middle-aged I wanted, the presence of mind without limitation. My life was over, and I never got what I wanted.
That's beautiful. I love the repetition. The piece has a lot of repeating themes, and each time you come to a new repetition, it feels like you're discovering it for the first time. That whoever this is, you're moving from piece to piece to piece, and it's not as though this is a full story that you have planned. But each time you do it, it feels like your character is realizing this each time, which is really cool. And you also have such a powerful voice and presence that it felt, as a viewer, I feel totally ready for you to take me wherever you're going. Like, I have such a trust in you as a performer. So no matter what season we're in, no matter what age you are, I'm ready to be there hearing about what's going on with you. And I think that comes from your voice and your presence. It's gorgeous.
Great. Thanks, both of you. We're going to move on to the second round of this. And in this round, I'm going to ask CJay to state something she's working on, some aspect of the performance that she wants to refine, or a question she has about for Phil to be considering as she goes through a second performance of it.
Okay. So John, I'm going to say a few things because I'm sort of torn between what I need help with. And maybe we can narrow down to it. So one is, when I think about this piece, I always think of it in three components: the movement and the vocal. And because I've done this and I have a history with this piece, in my mind, I can sort of hear different things musically that are happening. So one, I want to know if that sort of other voice or distraction that I'm having is reading at all. And then I also want, if I were to separate these pieces as I'm doing right now, can this stand alone and be as engaging and captivating as I would hope? And then lastly, just the timing question. Is it to like, what other flow or dynamic might I add that could be interesting? So I feel like that last question is more something that I think you can give me to play around with in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That all three of those make sense to me, and I can listen for all of those.
All right, I'm going again. Okay. It was spring, but it was summer I wanted. The warm days and great outdoors. It was summer, but it was fall I wanted. The colorful leaves and the cool, dry air. It was fall, but it was winter I wanted. The beautiful snow and the joy of the holiday season. It was winter, but it was spring I wanted. The warmth and the blossoming of nature. I was a child, but it was adulthood I wanted. The freedom and respect. I was 20, but it was 30 I wanted. to be mature and sophisticated. I was middle-aged, but it was 20 I wanted. The youth and the free spirit. I was retired, but it was middle age I wanted. The presence of mind without limitation. My life was over, and I never got what I wanted.
Cool. Your first question about distraction, I couldn't tell that you were, whether you were waiting for something or hoping for something supporting you that wasn't there. I absolutely could not tell in this performance. Can it stand alone? I think there's yes. I think in the pieces itself, the length of it, depending on where it lives, I think it can absolutely stand alone. You mentioning that other things are there makes me want to hear them. Like, I get really excited about hearing them. In terms of the timing and rhythm, there is a sense that the piece, it visually feels like there was this, but it was this I wanted. There was this, and it was this I wanted. There was this, and there was this I wanted. So I think it does feel repetitious in your rhythm. So if you want to discover more, I think that is, or if you want to feel as though you're journeying a lot of different places, that's not coming through right now. It feels like you're really just going around. It has a rhythmic sort of ritualistic quality.
That's helpful, thank you.
So Phil has given feedback on the areas that CJay identified, and note that while our first round was in the spirit of what's exciting, meaningful, memorable, the artist has really indicated where they want feedback, and so feedback can be across a range of positive, negative, things to work on, things to fix in this second round. And then we add this third round, which is to invite Phil as the coach to name one other area that he'd suggest CJay, the artist, explore, play with, or try out a suggestion. And one thing we always say about this one is we encourage the artist to try this idea out. They don't have to keep it. It's kind of like a wild card into their process and see what influence it has. So Phil, is there another area you'd suggest that CJay play with?
Yeah, the last line really strikes me, in that the person in this poem dies without ever getting what they want. And it feels like you're really at peace with this during the poem. And I'm wondering what would happen if your frustration shone through. If this character not continually never getting what they want, continually looking for something else that they want and never getting it, if that frustration shines through more in your delivery.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah,
try it out.
It was spring, but it was summer I wanted. The warm days and the great outdoors. It was summer, but it was fall I wanted. Cool, colorful leaves and the cool, dry air. It was fall, but it was winter I wanted. The beautiful snow and the joy of the holiday season. It was winter, but it was spring I wanted. The warmth and the blossoming of nature. I was a child, but it was adulthood I wanted. The freedom and respect. I was 20, but it was 30 I wanted. To be mature and sophisticated. I was middle-aged, but it was 20 I wanted. The youth and free spirit. I was retired, but it was middle age I wanted. The presence of mind without limitations. My life was over, and I never got what I wanted.
Cool. That was awesome.
I'd just invite the two of you to do any kind of reflection or debrief for a minute on what you experienced there.
So Phil, that was really interesting because what I realized even as you asked for that different approach was how often I, in this piece and in other pieces, am looking from the outside in at the character that I'm being. And because I can be in my person at peace with many things, I didn't really fully put on the skin of this other person and their perspective. And so it felt like really putting on someone else's mindset about it and just allowing myself to let CJay go and all of the work I've done on me, myself as a human, to have her sit in the other room while this other person wrestles a little bit more. And so it was fun. It was really interesting in real time to have this character want something. And really that to me is the crux of any character that you're playing. What do they want? And I feel like you sort of tapped into, for me, a missing component or piece or driving force for this character. And oftentimes when I do poetry or spoken word, I think of them as monologues less than as just sort of this written rhythmic poetry. And I felt like that helped me to get at it a little bit better. So I appreciated that input.
Thank you. This is a lot of fun. And that was how I was thinking about the difference between it being a presentation of work versus being a performance of a character. And I think that was really, really cool. I was really honored to be able to be a coach for you in this piece that you're working on. So it was a lot of fun.
Thanks to you both for letting us eavesdrop on this process, which is very personal, I think. But it strikes me, as it often does when we do this, how much development you get to see in the performance and in sort of the scope of the possibility just in a short period of time. Liz, I just want to throw it to you for a minute to see if you have any thoughts or reflections having seen this first round before we go to the second. You're muted.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. It was beautiful to watch. I want to just say a couple of things. One, this last thing John asked you to do, you want to reflect for a minute. We can all see how much happened during the reflection. So sometimes when we do these steps, we don't always get that extra one in there, but we saw CJay make sense of what had just happened to her. And by asking her to take a second to put language to it, I think that's powerful. And you could also notice that actually her understanding of that would also help her with her second, the thing she asked herself. What about the timing and the pacing? But I also want to point out to people for a minute, and CJay and Phil, I'm going to take you back into the second step of this for a minute. One of the things that people struggle with the orthodox form of critical response, and even with what we just observed, is time, how much time it takes. And there is a way to reduce this and still get things to happen. And there's also a way to even be more of a coach. So if we go back to the second moment, and CJay, you had 3 questions, and Phil, you took on all 3, but you could say, and by the end of the 3 you laid out, CJay, you said it's that third one, the one about I'm going to characterize it as pacing and timing right now. That may not have been your language, CJay, it's my version of your language. I hope you're okay with that. But the fact you were worried it was that it was too much repetition like that. You, instead of having her do the whole thing, you could take one small part and say, okay, try, CJay, I want you to. And as the coach, because she has opened up the territory, you actually can coach her. You could say something like, well, speed through that. Take the pauses out. I don't know what you would actually say, but she's asked for it. And in that principle of critical response, when the artist asks, move in there. This is your chance to, and you don't have to do the whole thing, CJay. You just take one little chunk of it and you guys work it until she experiences the thing that she's asking about. And then you move on to the last thing. So is it, John, I don't know if we want to try that for a second, if we have a second to do that, or if we just want to lay that out as what's going to go on the next round.
I think given time constraints, that's a great deepening of how this process can work. I'm going to suggest that we add those directives and possibilities to our second round.
Okay, great. Thank you for letting me jump in. Thank you.
Great. So we are going to go to a second round. As mutual coaching, that means our artists will reverse the roles, and Phil will be the performer and CJay will be the coach. Before we do that, I just want to pull up on a screen the basic steps of this process. So I'm going to share screen for a second here. Just bring this up for a second so that you can see. So in our second round, Phil will be performing. So he'll perform the monologue, and CJay will come in, state what's exciting, meaningful, memorable, effective. Then in a second round, Phil will name the thing that he's working on. In the version that we saw, he would perform, and the coach would give feedback. Now, our artists can decide now if they want to zero in on a moment or a particular challenge to workshop then. And then in the third round, the coach offers an additional thing to work on. There's a final performance, and then that essential debrief. I should mention too that we will have a version of this available in a little more detailed on the website, so that you'll be able to get a written description of how mutual coaching works. So with that, I am going to throw it back to Phil and CJay, and Phil as the performer.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, and like Liz said, CJay, just jump in, dig in there. You're a director. So this is a monologue from a play called Love Lies Bleeding. And a small bit of context, my character, Sean, is speaking to his father, who is in a persistent vegetative state, and they have begun administering morphine. So this is sort of like in the evening before the next day when he dies. And this is Sean speaking. I was proud of you. Did you know that? Proud to be the son of an artist. That one day, I was 12 years old, standing in the studio to watch you work. Acrylic on masonite, hearing those fantastic words. Painting made sense to me. Abstract painting made sense to me. It was acrylic on masonite and cold black coffee in a paper cup. I drank some of your coffee and nearly fell down dead. All right, here's a joke. It's a philosophical joke. I told it to my seniors in geophysics. It goes like this. Two tiny young fish are swimming in the sea. They come upon an older fish. He says to them, "Hey fellas, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on past. They swim for many miles, and finally one fish says to the other, "What the fuck is water?" It's a philosophical joke. What the fuck is water? In time, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to look a certain way and sound a certain way and work at things. And I trained myself to think a certain way. But we were scared, weren't we? Both of us.
CJay, you're muted.
Are we there?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is the first time I'm hearing this. Thank you for the setup. It's interesting. Some of the things that were standing out to me were the way that you were landing on things that were clearly important to the son, the acrylic on masonite, and the value that you were placing, I felt like was really well expressed and believable to me. The joke for me, I actually really enjoyed. And then also just the slight body language that you do as a performer, it's super subtle. It's not sort of, hey, I'm over here, to tell stories. So there's body language that you have when you're talking to your dad, and then there's body language that you have when you're like, okay, here's the joke, I'm setting this up. And so it was a subtle thing, but it was noticeable, and also just made the exchange feel very real. And as you would with someone that you actually have a real relationship with. And just, I find this piece just really interesting. And I've heard some things that you have done before. And so sort of outside of this moment right now, I'm starting to get a sense of you as an artist, and your pacing, the nature of your connectivity to the characters that you choose, I feel like makes so much sense and is really well suited for you.
Thank you. Great. I'm going to do it again. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm working on this piece is how is really his emotion and his revealing of emotion. So I keep going back and forth between these two feelings about, in this moment, is he caged and just remains caged? Are there moments when cracks happen in this cage that he's sort of locked himself up? Or is there a moment when the cage just fully breaks and he just like lets everything out? Mm-hmm. So a focus area is like, how strong is the cage with this person, and are there cracks, and does it ever break in this moment? Does that make sense?
It does. Do you have a question for me about what I saw?
I think when I do it again, I would love it if you would focus on whether you feel like there should be cracks, and if so, where those would be when his emotion would come through.
Okay.
Cool. All right. I was proud of you. Did you know that? Proud to be the son of an artist. That one day, I was 12 years old, standing in the studio to watch you work. Acrylic on masonite, hearing those fantastic words. Painting made sense to me. Abstract painting made sense to me. It was acrylic on masonite and cold black coffee in a paper cup. I drank some of your coffee and nearly fell down dead. All right, here's a joke. It's a philosophical joke. I told it to my seniors in geophysics. It goes like this. Two tiny young fish are swimming in the sea, and they come upon an older fish, and he says to them, "Hey, fellas, how's the water?" And the two fish swim on past. They swim for many miles, and finally one fish says to the other, "What the fuck is water?" It's a philosophical joke. What the fuck is water? In time, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to look a certain way and sound a certain way. I worked at things. I trained myself to think a certain way. But we were scared, weren't we? Both of us.
Nice. Okay. So I can't tell, Phil, if this is only because, so oftentimes when we're doing this, I'm writing notes for myself just because, you know, of a certain age, I don't remember everything. And so I can't tell if I'm landing on things a little more just because it's the second time around, but I do think there are some things that you laid into that I do want to speak to as it pertains specifically to the emotion. So right at the top, and I also made you bigger in the screen and I could really get a sense of you, your eyes, and I could see what you saw, and I could see that you were seeing something, right? And so that emotion and that feeling for the person that you're talking to and what you're talking about was really clear, but it was also really, happy almost seems trite, but it was on a positive side. that seemed really real and genuine. And then I also read much more clearly, because of that emotion, the difference between the thing that you appreciate about the artwork, even at 12 years old, to just the happenstance of drinking coffee and I almost died, right? Because it was just commentary. And so all of a sudden that was clearer to me this time around than the first. And then after the joke, initially I had thought that your character should somehow respond to your own joke or feel like it was funny. But then this time around, it felt like a mask. It felt like you told a joke, but I don't know if you were like, you know, that was the purpose, as it was to just, here, let me tell this. But it was a thin mask for something that was troubling. And then that's what I felt more clear right after that, when you go into, in time, I knew what I wanted. Although I'm unsure with where you're going with that, I did feel this thinly veiled, troublesome thing brewing in your heart that you wanted to now share with him. So that's how I interpreted the flow of emotion.
That's really helpful. That makes me want to try something different this third time.
And CJay, is there an additional thing that you would suggest that Phil work on?
Well, it's interesting because I almost like talked myself out of that thing now. So I have a question. When you said that makes you want to work on other things, is there anything in particular that comes to mind?
It made me want to try the joke differently. It made me want to try laughing at it.
Okay.
And then seeing.
I got you. So then this was going to be my suggestion is, what if in telling this joke, your hope is to lighten and to the mood. Your hope is to, yeah, I'll try this and sort of bring that to the surface. So that's one thing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
That makes me think trying to lighten with the joke means I'll end somewhere different also.
Okay.
Because right now it's like the joke is right here and then I end in sort of like a big boulder. But if I try to lighten with a joke and it fails, it gives me somewhere to go when I end.
Okay. Great.
Awesome. All right, let me try. Let me try that. I'm going to start just with the joke. I'm just going to do the middle part and then the joke.
That's good.
It was acrylic on masonite and cold black coffee in a paper cup. I drank some of your coffee and nearly fell down dead. All right, here's a joke. It's a philosophical joke. I told it to my seniors in geophysics. It goes like this. Two tiny young fish are swimming in the sea, and they come upon an older fish. He says to them, "Hey, fellas, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on past. They swim for many miles, and finally one fish says to the other, "What the fuck is water?" It's a philosophical joke. What the fuck is water? In time, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to look a certain way and sound a certain way. I worked at things. I trained myself to think a certain way. But we were scared, weren't we? Both of us.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, that I've never tried to make it so that the joke is attempt to lighten the mood and fail. It always feels like he's had a plan with the joke, like he's doing it ironically. But this time, because he attempts at something and fails, that failure leads him into the vulnerability. That like, I tried something, this isn't working, and like that breaks, that failure of lightening the mood breaks it, and then he can kind of find somewhere else to go. That's really cool.
Yeah, that was pretty powerful. And I think that tie makes so much sense, right? It's when we do something that seems relatively small, but it mirrors the bigger things in life, right? The trying and the failing. And then it made so much sense when it's like, I tried to look a certain way and do a certain thing, but I wasn't. And it literally was just like, here's this little pebble and here's this big boulder. They're holding the same equilibrium. And so, and the transition, Phil, was so believable and so real. And the lightning helped me lighten. And then it was like that thing that they do in movies where they lift you to like drop the bottom out, and then you're like, oh, what just happened? So it was that perfect balance of ha 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 shkaboom.
Yeah, and it's perfect because he repeats the punchline so that the first time he thinks the punchline will work, and then he realizes it won't work, and then the punchline leads him into something else. Yeah, I like that. That was really cool.
Really
Thank
great.
you, CJay.
Thank you, CJay and Phil, for that demonstration. I want to also thank our participants for refraining from using the chat stream as this was going on. I think it was really helpful just to be able to focus on CJay and Phil. But at this moment, I'm going to offer us a little moment for reflection and invite you just on your own just to think about what you observed in this variation mutual coaching, and add any questions to the chat stream that you might have, either about the process or for CJay and Phil about their own experience of the process. So we'll take a minute or two for that. And maybe as we're waiting for questions to come over, I turn again to you, Liz, about your own reflections here, what you observed, or any additional ideas about mutual coaching that you'd like to add at this point.
Well, what I'd like to say is that, again, this particular variation of critical response grew out of structure of dance technique classes, which tend to run anywhere from 55 minutes, say, to an hour and a half or something. And time, you're kind of driving through time in these situations. And so I want to just observe what happened when Phil picked up the piece halfway through rather than the whole piece. And this may also be a discipline difference, like in dancers, we might very well just pick just a little tiny section to work on. Or when we've done it with orchestras, we've heard musicians just work on 2 bars of music over and over and over again. So just to remind everybody, it can be small. And even that first step, I mean, you two were amazingly generous with each other, and it was beautiful to observe. But I often, when I'm mutual coaching with people, will just say, you can only say 2 things, just 2, and then stop and go on. Do not go on. And that helps that first step just sharpen and get going.
We do have some questions coming over on the chat stream. Let's see. From Bess Palpak, I'm wondering about audience, like we were audience for this process, and does that change, enhance, grow it versus when it's actually one-on-one? So I'm hearing that a little bit of like, what are the effects of having this observed as opposed to a sort of private experience? And I should say, when we do it in workshops, we often do it one-on-one, people off by themselves just doing it. And we sometimes have people demo it. And for an online encounter, you can do it by having people go into separate chat rooms. But any reflections from anyone on the difference that might make to have an audience as opposed to not having an audience?
Sometimes I've done that. One of my favorite times with this was recently at Banff, where there were like 50 or 60 people in the room. Everybody had a partner and everybody was working all at the same time. And the room was like, the energy in the room was just ridiculously wonderful. So Yeah, it can work. It works both ways. John and I'm recalling that time when we did it with it was the Pittsburgh, one of the Cleveland Orchestra, one of those orchestras. And people were, they sat and they watched two of their peers go through these 2 bars of music. And it was like, you could hear a pin drop. People were so focused. So I don't think best it's one way or the other. It just depends. And it's different, but it's not good, bad, just different.
I certainly think there's an education in observing it. You know, I learned by watching Phil and CJay, I just learned a whole bunch about performance qualities. And so, you know, a way to do it is to have 2 people demonstrate it for a class and then have everybody cull the learnings from what they observed in the encounter.
I see John, if you're okay, I see a question from Daniel. Berkeley,
Yeah.
It's about this question about who's leading. I mean, what we did this time is fairly typical when people are learning it for the first time, which is that you saw John, actually an outsider, led people through the steps, and then we let them go and do the work. Hopefully you're in a room where people both, since it's reciprocal and both people are going to play both sides, you want to have enough time for both people to be the artists and both people to be the coaches. I don't think if people know the process, they need help. They may need time management. You may need to say to them, I'm going to give you 7 minutes to go through this twice, and I'll let you know when we're halfway through, or something like that. But I think each can lead. Other people thoughts about that? But that's my sense. It's a mutual thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We have another question here from Yehuda Hyman. Thoughts on when you think a group of students in a theater or movement class are ready to go off into chat rooms or breakout rooms and do this on their own without a teacher present? Like, what's the point at which we feel like people are ready to explore this and be beneficial for each other?
Well, that's an interesting question, Yehuda. I find, maybe I would say that if I'm not sure, I might have students just do the first step, pair up and just show each other something and just practice that for a while. Just so people get the hang of this reciprocity and the exchange. But honestly, I think people can do this from the get-go. I mean, people have information and they want to help each other. But maybe other people have thoughts about that.
The one thing that I'd reflect on is what are the stakes of what's being presented. So if you've got, often when we teach this process to people who are learning critical response process, we just have them come up with a quick movement improvisation based on building a phrase out of gestures. So they're generally not super invested in this being the greatest thing they've ever done. It's in some ways a quick improvisation. They're interested in what the content can tell them, but a person's artistry is not necessarily at high stakes. So one way to introduce it is to have people do it on something low stakes before they do it on their big audition monologues that they're really working hard and put a lot of focus on. So some of it's about how you introduce it and through stages. Let's see, any other questions here?
Yehuda's come back saying that actually the question about the stakes are higher. One thing for me about this is sort of part of my introduction, Yehuda, is I know that students want to hear from their teacher, but it feels to me equally important to get students, get ensemble members, get staff, to want to hear from each other, even when the stakes are high. So I think the higher the stakes, the more reciprocity is going to be helpful. And yeah. So I'm not sure. I feel there's a difference in this, but.
Another interesting question here from Yvette Angelique Hader Adams. Thank you. I liked viewing the live just-in-time coaching. Is it possible to have 2 or more coaches per artist? And that raises for me a question about when is it mutual coaching and when is it critical response? Because in critical response, of course, we typically have multiple responders to an artist's work. So is there some kind of middle ground where we're doing the structure, but with multiple people doing the coaching? My guess is it'd be something you could experiment with, but it feels like the terms would change a bit. Liz, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, because it allows us to point out one of the real differences in mutual coaching from critical response. Because in mutual coaching, you are collapsing, for those of you who know critical response, you're collapsing that permission question of step 4. In this particular mode, we're saying to people, it's okay to give people a fix-it. That third, in CJay, the wild card, I'm going to get to tell you something. I developed this in part because, again, coming out of my technique classes and the fact that you might spend a year with people in the same class, or you're in a rehearsals thing, you're 3 years together, or in orchestras, you're 15 years together. You guys, you know each other. You know each other, and you know your strengths and weaknesses. And so the opportunity to actually turn to somebody and say, you know what, try it like this. You don't have to keep it, but you have to try it on, is I propose a gift. So let's say we're in trios, and now 2 of you are giving a gift to me, and then I've got to try it. It means I'm going to have to try 2 different things unless the 2 of you agree. And that may be also interesting, to have the 2 coaches have to find agreement, because now you're building collaborative skills. So there are other things that are going to be going on in the trio besides just getting feedback to the individual. The main thing John just said, though, that I want to make clear here is that we try these things out, do the research, see what happens. It's not like there's a right wrong. Typically, it's like notice what happened and tweak as you need to.
And that's kind of a general reflection on the idea of variations of critical response in general. And as we approach the final minutes of this webinar, Liz, do you have any closing thoughts on the nature of experimenting with variations, and what to hold true to and what to play around with, and any principles to pursue when you're adapting critical response either to a teaching situation or an online situation?
Well, I think maybe, John, you actually should close it out, because I think you've thought about this so deeply, and others on our panel may also, but it's like you could hear in my language, this question about when do you tell somebody what to try? And how is that an opinion that's going to load this person down and make the person walk out feeling like, gee, I never, I feel terrible. Why are you telling me I have to do this thing? As opposed to thinking about it as a gift. That, this language emerges because you try it the other way and you realize, wait, there's been harm. This isn't working. What do I have to do here to fix this, to make this work so that the person wants to do their best work? They can't wait to go back. They are really excited to work. And I just want to say right now, in this period of COVID, I know talking to a lot of teachers around the country, that many of our students, and ourselves included, are tired. And we are wondering, and we're full of uncertainty. And we can feel that drop off in the energy and in the approaches, even to some of our best students as they approach the end of the year, when they would have gotten to do something fantastic. And I think you might find mutual coaching is actually a way to energize people, that they're together one-on-one and helping each other. And that little step of generosity can actually, be like manna in the desert in these times.
Thanks, Liz. As we go to closure, CJay and Phil, I want to thank you both. Jeff Bliss here, whose question we didn't get to, unfortunately, does describe you as 2 gracious enactors in this demonstration. I think that's a beautiful description, gracious enactors. Gracious enactors, do you have anything you'd like to say in closure, having done the process and been part of the reflection about it?
Sure. I actually was very surprised at the one piece of feedback or instruction that I gave to Phil, that it garnered so much. I almost felt like, oh, is this really going to be helpful? This is just this one little thing. Maybe I should have more to tell him. And so there was an insecurity about whether or not this is actually even useful. And so I was actually pleasantly surprised to find that something that I contributed was helpful to his performance and helped him discover something that was bigger than where the sort of pull of the thread started. And then lastly, I did want to tell Jeff, I have that same challenge that you have because I teach 10th graders who may not be sort of as emotionally gracious to one another. And so I will send in the chat a reply as to some things that have been useful or helpful to me.
Thanks, CJ, so much.
Yeah, I felt that there was certainly a sense of, as a teacher, I sometimes get worried about pushing, Liz, like you said, especially now with people being tired and people feeling like what's too much. But then when I perform, the push feels so good because actually getting pushed deepens my identity as an artist. That by being pushed, I'm like, oh yeah, I know that this action against my performance helps me deepen my work. And that sense of generous coaching and generous pushing helps me towards that. And so I don't know what it takes to maintain a sense of resilience or energy or something in that moment. But I'm constantly reminded that when I am the artist, I love getting pushed.
CJ and Phil, thank you so much for demonstrating and reflecting with us today. Liz, thanks so much for bringing these ideas and techniques into the world and your ongoing work on them. Liz never stops thinking, developing, deepening her practice, and we're all really grateful. And to all of you who've participated in this webinar as viewers and questioners, reflectors, we are so grateful to you for your participation. We're hoping to do another one of these coming up. There's been a lot of interest in the neutral question as a key part of critical response, so that may be the focus of our next webinar here. Meanwhile, keep in touch. You'll see a description of neutral coaching strategy on our resource page soon. And thanks to everybody for their participation today.